My incel brother finally meets a girl, but she's actually married and trying to con him, and when her crazy husband finds out, his life is suddenly in serious danger. I, 23F, have a 29-year older brother named August who was up until recently what you would call an incel. I'm sure you know what that means in this day and age, but just for the uninformed, it means involuntarily celibate. Or to put it even more simply, the guy couldn't get any. But it wasn't for a lack of trying. August had been trying to get a girlfriend his entire life. Of course he went about it in every wrong way imaginable. He thought if he made as much money as possible it would attract the kind of girls he wanted. That kind of twisted logic led him to try to become a tech entrepreneur, an attempt that went as well as me and my brother and parents imagined. He blew all of his savings on his investment and ended up having to file for bankruptcy by the time he was 25. Now he works at a family entertainment center called the Magic Castle, where he gives kids cheap toys in exchange for arcade tickets and cleans puke off the bouncy castle. But that being said, my brother drives a 3-year-old Corvette and lives in a fairly nice apartment with a view overlooking our city's river. How is that possible on a Magic Castle salary, you ask? Well, that's a good question that can easily be answered by the $100,000 settlement August got for being hit by a drunk pizza delivery driver late one night while he was jogging. But that was all 3 years ago, and the way he spends, he's bound to be running low on that by now. My parents begged him to invest it, or at least use some of it to try to further his limited education, but he'd rather show it off to try to get a girlfriend. And while the car would often attract the attention of several girls, they'd be turned off as soon as August opened his mouth. Because despite his massive insecurities, he put on a front of a smug, entitled jerk. Obviously some girls don't mind that, especially when a pot of gold could be at the end of it, and August's brand new, very first girlfriend is one of them. How it all happened is still a bit of a mystery, but apparently he was hanging out at the mall one day instead of going to work and the bottle blonde Dakota saw him getting out of his Corvette. She literally followed him around the mall, going to his video game stores and Hot Topic, until finally striking up a conversation with him about the car. My brother isn't a model, but he's not the worst looking guy in the world. His personality just sucks. But Dakota didn't seem to mind, because within minutes she was the one to ask him out. August must have felt like he'd died and gone to heaven. He'd hardly had to work for any of this, and it was all just falling into his lap. Of course there was a giant catch. This Dakota girl was clearly only into him because she thought he had money. It was obvious to all of us, and probably even to him if he was honest with himself. But sooner or later, when the money ran dry, she was bound to find out that he wasn't actually a tech entrepreneur, which is the profession he came up with to explain the car to her. There was obviously no way he was going to admit to working at the freaking Magic Castle to her, and we were all instructed not to mention it when he brought her over to our parents' house for Thanksgivings. It was a little awkward, to say the least, passing the gravy with a girl who we all knew was there for only one reason. Our family isn't rich by any means, so she was obviously confused to see the size of my parents' house. Not that it's a closet, but no mansion. But I guess she was fine settling with new money, if that's what my brother indeed was. After the dinner he planned on taking her home and going back to his own apartment, but we all convinced him to go back to my parents to hang out for a while. Little did he know that we were planning an intervention of sorts about his brand new relationship. He walked in the room looking as pale as a ghost, but seemed to immediately know what we were about to say. My brother was going to say his part first, but he barely got a word out before August started in on him, accusing him of betraying his only brother, and all of us trying to sabotage his one and only shot at true love and happiness with Dakota. It was all so totally insane. I couldn't believe I was saying it, but he was clearly beginning to believe his own BS. But when my dad had had enough, he stood up and used his big booming voice to finally attempt to set him straight. He told August that it was obvious to everyone that this girl was only using him for his supposed money, and that as soon as she found out he really didn't have any she'd be right out the door. He told him that he needs to get his crap together and start acting like a man. I'm not sure that sort of old school advice is going to be very helpful for a guy like him, but it definitely shut him up at the moment. Actually, it shut him up completely. He turned around and ran out of the house and got into his Corvette. He gunned it as he backed out, knocking and running over my dad's custom-made mailbox before peeling off down the road into the black night. My mom frantically tried calling him over and over, but we all told her to stop. If he's still out there driving like a lunatic and pouting, which is what he does on the country roads when he's mad about something, the last thing he needs is the distraction of a phone call. Of course, a mother's always going to worry about her son, and she was up all night driving my dad crazy, threatening to call the police for help. August was a grown man, despite his behavior. He could throw a temper tantrum over being called out on his crap if he wanted to, but she even called me at 4 a.m., saying that she'd dozed off for a second and had a dream that something terrible had happened, that he crashed his car off some rural road and was in desperate need of help. I told her to take a pill and go back to sleep, but I had no way of knowing what was going to happen next. She ended up following my advice, so I was sound asleep when they got the call from the hospital. Dad answered and dropped his ceramic mug when he heard the news, his retirement mug from the bank that he's treasured for years. August had been involved in an accident early that morning, but it wasn't anything like my mom's dream, and had nothing even to do with the Corvette, although he had been out driving it all night. But at some point in the early morning when he got home, there was an accident in his apartment building. And by accident, I mean that August fell down a flight of stairs in the building. Of course, this was his story when we got to the hospital and he eventually regained consciousness. But there's only 10 stairs per floor, and unless he had a running start and literally threw himself down, there's no way his injuries would make any sense. Both arms and legs were broken, 3 ribs, a broken cheek and skull fracture. The doctors said he was lucky there wasn't brain damage and the building custodian found him in time. Everyone knew, including the doctors, that someone had beaten the crap out of my brother. But he was refusing to tell us anything other than what he already had. He slipped and fell down the stairs, plain and simple. So what the heck is going on? I honestly have no idea, but I know that Dakota is somehow wrapped up in this. Did she find out the truth and go berserk on him? Push him down the stairs when he wasn't looking? I don't think that little girl is capable of this kind of damage. Someone else had to have been involved. August is still in the hospital, but they're supposed to let him out either today or tomorrow. But the funny thing is, my brother just called and told me that he's terrified to leave. Apparently he doesn't want to go back to his apartment, and begged my brother to let him stay with him. He again refused to tell him the reasons why, but considering his recovery is going to be long and painful, it's probably a good idea anyway. I don't know if we'll ever find out what happened or what he's so terrified of, but I'll be sure to let you know when and if it happens. Update 1. It's been 3 days and I have an update for everyone that doesn't disappoint. Although it certainly disappointed all of us, least of all August, who is in seriously deep crap. We all finally got the answers we were looking for about how he was so gruesomely wounded and ended up the way he was, as well as why he was so terrified to be released from the hospital. My older brother let August come back to his house after being released from the hospital. Throughout that first day there he was still pretty out of it on pain pills, so I hate to admit that we all sort of took advantage. We started asking him questions about the accident and about this girl Dakota, and the bits and pieces he mumbled out soon formed a shocking picture. Dakota wasn't anything like we imagined, she was even worse. And she was far from unattached when she stalked August in the mall that day. In fact, she's actually married to a real piece of work named Butchie, and the two of them are in on conning my brother. I guess their standard operating procedure is to find a rich guy, have Dakota get involved with him and then bleed him dry for everything he's worth. They've apparently managed to bankrupt more than one sad wealthy guy based on her looks and superficial charms. But in my brother's case, their instincts were dead wrong, and he managed to fool them long enough to make them truly enraged when they found out the truth. Because not only are Dakota and this Butchie dude married, the two of them have a kid, a little boy named Timmy. And when Timmy got invited to a birthday party at the Magic Castle, guess who handed the young family their putters for cosmic golf? The look on everyone's faces must have been a sight to behold, but instead of immediately freaking out, grabbing the club and beating him with it, Butchie stayed cool and bided his time. It wasn't until that night that they met him in the hallway outside his apartment and confronted him about his real job. With his reality crashing down all around him, August had to have finally been accepting what he always knew to be true. Dakota was only using him, and even worse than that, so was the type of guy who he felt had been pushing him around his entire life. But instead of being shoved into lockers or getting his head stuffed into a toilet like in high school, my poor loser brother's head was used like a speed bag before he was thrown down a flight of stairs. He was lucky to be alive, he wasn't too doped up on the meds to not know that, but he also said something that filled us all with dread: if I can only talk to her I'm sure I can make it right. The next day he was finally more himself, and when we told him that he told us the entire story of what happened, he went into full denial mode. He said it was just the painkillers talking, and none of that was true. He fell down the stairs and that was that. But the jig was up, and with all of us circling around him, he eventually caved and copped to all of it being true. I guess it was the pride that was stopping him. His stupid pride that he's had his whole life. August simply couldn't admit that he'd been bamboozled by a pretty girl who wasn't even going to put up with him for the money that wasn't even there, but was going to rob him blind with her partner in crime husband. It was another level of pathetic that was too painful for him to admit he'd sunk to. But it was the truth, and he was about to face it again in another very real way. Because even though he was running low on funds compared to what he used to have, he still had more zeros than most of us. And when he went back to his place to pick up a few things before going back to my brother's, he realized that half the contents of his wallet was gone, and she knew his PIN numbers. After we all stopped yelling at him for giving this crazy woman his bank information, we were all able to calm down enough to call the bank and credit card companies to cancel his cards. But to our horror, we found that his accounts had already been cleaned out. Dakota and Butchie have withdrawn nearly the entire sum of August's savings, and now they're nowhere to be found. If telling his family about all of this was hard, telling the police was doubly so, and I had to practically hold August's hand as he did it. But now the cops are looking for the couple, or at least they say they are. I guess there's enough evidence to put a warrant out for their arrest, but we're still waiting to see if they've used any of his credit cards. The cops are saying that's the best chance we have for now to see where they're going. I truly can't believe any of this is happening, but I guess my brother's desperation has just led to more trouble than he could have ever imagined. I hope they catch these people before they can take advantage of some other poor incel like him, but I honestly don't know if it'll happen anytime soon. They're probably long gone by now, but I'll be sure to be back with any updates if they poke their heads out. In the meantime, August is going back to his apartment. I guess it's been confirmed that the terrible twosome are no longer in town. He's got a long road of healing to travel, physically and mentally. Update 2. In the wee hours of the morning, a young couple were speeding along a desert highway somewhere south of Las Vegas. But a state trooper was hiding behind an old billboard, and after pulling them over soon discovered the warrants for their arrest. But as is totally on brand for Butchie, who was drinking whiskey from a gas station sippy cup in the driver's seat, he hit the gas and floored it to speeds upward of 120 miles per hour. After an hour-long high-speed chase, the couple spun out in a massive cloud of sand and were surrounded by police. They were arrested for a multitude of crimes, including defrauding brother and several other guys like him. They all had to testify at the trial, of course, something that August found nearly impossible to do. But with the help and support of the other guys who were caught up in this, he was somehow able to get through it. With the help of his testimony, they put Dakota and Butchie away for 6 years each. But unfortunately, the scandalous story quickly found an audience with the internet, and everyone wanted to either interview or mock the incel fraudster victims, as the true crime shows were calling them. Thankfully, the guys had the idea of forming a support group for each other after the trial, and along with regular meetings, each guy has a buddy who helps him through the hard times. August's buddy is a victim of the couple named Wyatt. It turns out they both share a lot of similar interests and have quickly become friends. I really hope he ends up making some more. Maybe this will finally get him used to talking to people at least. Maybe someday soon he can even get comfortable enough to talk to a girl who isn't out for his money. Not that he has any now anyway. The settlement money is long gone. Although he's part of a civil lawsuit against the couple for damages, and is now very much considering a book deal. We doubt if that will ever happen, or at least we hope it won't. We just want August to be okay, and maybe meet a nice girl someday. And Dakota and Butchie stayed in jail for a long, long time.